Welcome. You're on the Fringe show. I'm your host, Tatiana Zalan, and I go live every Friday at 2 p.m. Dubai time. The Fringe helps you to navigate the rapidly changing world and increase the odds of your success. Here we talk about technology, startups, entrepreneurs, and mental models of successful people so that you too can take advantage of the opportunities in the new digital world. Today, I'm going to talk about DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, and whether they are the institutions of the future. We'll talk about what these DAOs are, or how do they work, why they're so important, and I'll give you some examples as well. Let me just remind you that that's a live show, and so please be known, let yourself known to Facebook, allow Facebook to identify you, and please comment, ask questions as we go along in this rather interesting but a little bit difficult topic. So decentralized autonomous organizations, what do we mean by that? And let me probably give you a definition of decentralized autonomous organizations, or DAOs, by aragon.org. And, I'm an academic, so I need to give you a definition. So a DAO, it's according to them, I'm reading this out, a DAO is an internet native entity with no central management, which is regulated by a set of automatically enforceable rules on a public blockchain, and whose goal is to take on a life of its own and incentivize people to achieve a shared common mission. So that's rather kind of a mouthful, but we will unpack it one by one. So, decentralized autonomous organization. Why is it decentralized? Because there is no central leadership. It's autonomous because the idea may take a life of its own, and it always does. And it is an organization. It operates along some set of rules. It is a very new approach to coordination. In the past, we used to have, cooperatives or maybe common stock companies, joint stock companies, kairetsu in Japan. And all of these corporate forms were designed for the evolution of trust between participants. And the idea of a DAO is not a theoretical concept, is not some kind of a science fiction. It does exist. Actually, there is a recent survey done by a group of people, I think, from the Bankless. And what they showed is that in September 2021, right now, many DAOs in the ecosystem have billions of dollars on them in capital and hundreds of creators working for these DAOs. So it's not sci-fi, it's a reality today for many organizations and for many creators as well. Probably one of the first DAOs was Bitcoin itself, but modern forms of DAOs typically include organizations built with smart contracts on the Ethereum blockchain. DAOs are what Vitalik Buterin, the co-founder of Ethereum, describes are organizations where you have automation at the center and humans at the periphery. In traditional organization, it's all vice versa, right? We have humans at the center and we're being helped by technology, but DAOs reverses this logic altogether. However, it still heavily relies on individuals because we do need humans to perform some tasks that automation doesn't. The very idea of the DAO was born somewhere in the mid-2010s, around the time when the Ethereum community was being built. And the DAO at that time was the groundbreaking idea of creating a computer-run organization. The business rules, they said, would be set in a computer program with the help of a code and executed with as little human interaction as possible. And because the organization itself would be built on a public blockchain, such as Ethereum at that time, decision-making and flows of funds would be fully transparent, uncensorable, and immutable. So that was the vision at the time in the mid-2010s. But at that time, it was all limited to cryptocurrencies, but DAOs themselves don't have to be limited to cryptocurrencies. It can be also extended to unmanned escrow services, incorruptible arbitration services, governments that no longer can ignore the constitution, even crowdsourced venture capital firms, and many, many more. Today, what are they used for? What are the DAOs used for? Fundraising, compensation, coordination, governance, development of projects and products, and marketing of these products and projects. What are some of the features of these DAOs, or who can qualify? What kind of organizations can qualify to be called a DAO? There have been some research done around that. What are the common features? And they appear to be, firstly, they need to have transaction tokens. So a DAO should contain valuable property in the form of tokens, and they can use these tokens for rewards as well as for voting rights. Automatic execution. So the DAO is an entity that acts independently. It cannot be influenced by any kind of external forces. There has to be consensus. All the stakeholders, or shareholders, if you will, need to fully agree what kind of decisions to be made, and for example, and fully agree on the decision itself. If you are a member, if you want to withdraw funds, for example, that needs to be agreed on by general consensus. We don't have employees in DAOs, there are contractors. So the DAO will hire manufacturers, developers, and other contractors as well. If you want to make a proposal, then you can do so. All decision-making in a DAO will start with a proposal, and this proposal will very often require some money to be put into it, and that's been made. It's been made in order to prevent the overload of the network, so that it's not flooded with some senseless, not very interesting, not important proposals. And finally, voting, the last step here, the last characteristic. This step is really crucial, and activities will include such as money raising, investing, upgrades to the protocol, and that will only take place if the majority takes votes and vote for them. So let's have a look at how does a DAO work. Firstly, on these types of organizations, investors need somehow to pull money together. And this investment will give them voting rights on which project to spend the funds on. And these voting rights can be distributed based on the amount of the tokens called, on your contribution, or it can be done evenly. And the entire process of collection of funds is set in very specific concrete rules of operation, and that forms the backbone, the foundation of the smart contract. Initial funds are crowdsourced, and investors can be located from anywhere in the world. And once this contract is being deployed, then these organizations will function immutably, independent of the creators. This whole voting process in DAOs is very different from what we see in traditional hierarchical structures. It subverts this process. So instead of all the decisions being made top down, it's really bottom up. And funds could be used for paying salaries or as an internal currency to reward some work of these contractors. And probably it will be easier if we can illustrate this with a simple example. Suppose you're a part of a DAO and you submit a proposal and you want to allocate funds to a project that you love. For example, you want to say these 10K will go to a project such as protocol upgrade, or maybe you want to have better interoperability with other blockchains. So the DAO will then vote on this project, whether it's a yes or no. And suppose the DAO says, yes, your proposal is interesting, so they want to approve it. And this proposal will definitely include a smart contract. And let me explain very quickly what a smart contract is, just in case there are my fans, my followers there that don't know what a smart contract is. The easiest ways to describe a smart contract is just a digital mechanism that involves digital assets and two more parties, and some of these parties will put assets into this digital mechanism, and assets automatically will be redistributed among these parties according to a formula based on certain data, and these data are not known at the time when the contract is associated. Even if we break it down and make it even simpler, imagine a smart contract as you purchasing something from a vending machine. You go to the vending machine, you have $1, you put it inside, and for this $1, the vending machine will hopefully give you, say, a bottle of water, right? So it's a simple contract which runs under the principle, if this event happens, then this event will occur, just like you have with a vending machine. So going back to our example, if your proposal is approved, if the DAO says yes, then the smart contract will be executed and your proposal will be funded. It's probably important to realize that there is no such thing as 100% decentralization. It's not a dichotomy, it's a continuum, and each organization will have their own governance rules and their own degree of centralization or decentralization rather. The DAO itself is architecturally decentralized. Many participants in many different countries. But the execution logic, which is embedded in the smart contract, is definitely, or in the protocol, is definitely centralized. Why are DAOs important? Why do we have to worry about them? And let me quote, it's a direct quote from Eric Voorhees, who is one of the thought leaders in the blockchain space. He was an early adopter, a pioneer, if you will, in the crypto space. And he's also a startup founder. He founded Shapeshift, which I will be talking about later. And the reasons that DAOs are so interesting is because they fundamentally change the economic relationship between people. It's an important part of governance in all decentralized ecosystems. DAO itself changes our relationship with governance from something that's imposed on us, upon us really, by others, into something that we actually choose to opt into. And at the same time, we as participants in the DAO, we're equally serving and we're being served rather than just serving others, being employees. And in one of my last shows, I talked about how blockchain can be used to start new cities and even new nations, which are cloud first, blockchain first. And DAOs are a perfect example of how you can start a city, a project, or any sort of a nation even using blockchain, using a DAO, using smart contracts. The benefits of the DAO is that it's trustless, or at least trust minimized. It can't be shut down, nobody can. It's because it's not centralized, there is no third party, and it's an open source, so you can always check the status of the system, you can check the code. And I think why DAOs are also important, and this is something which probably is overlooked very often, it teaches people self-reliance, because users who are going into DAOs need to have a certain degree of personal financial responsibility, which is probably true of all crypto, but particularly with DAOs, because they're not used to it in the traditional finance. There's always a third party that will kind of help them out. This is not the case with DAOs, and people who are using them understand that very well. Now, let's kind of look at some of the projects that are in the DAO space and what they do and how they help and why they are new institutions, at least to me. And we start with a DAO hack. The very first DAO that was formed ever was called the DAO. Not very inventive, but that's how it's known. It was the biggest and the most ambitious project at the time. The time was 2016, within the Ethereum ecosystem, built on Ethereum blockchain. It included some of the most distinguished people, some of the most distinguished curators and advisors like Vitalik Buterin and Gavin Wood and Vlad Zamfir. It had a 4 weeks fundraiser at the beginning, crowdsourcing funds, and by the most optimistic estimate, they expected to collect maybe 20 million. Ethereum itself collected 18 in the initial coin offering. But surprise, what they did was attracting over $150 million in the end. And that's roughly, that at the time was 14% of the whole Ethereum network, Ethereum blockchain. And developers themselves were really worried at that time because it was a very much experimental piece of code. And lo and behold, the DAO was hacked and drained of $56 million in the end. It caused a huge split in the Ethereum community, a huge tension. What to do? On the one hand, all the developers, Vitalik Buterin himself, they all believed in immutability of blockchain. That's, after all, it's one of its most prominent and most interesting features, where code is all. But on the other hand, Ethereum itself as a project was at risk. It was only 2 years old, if that, and so extreme measures were needed. And in the end, what the Ethereum community decided is to go for a hard fork. What hard fork means, put it simply, you abandon the old chain and you start a new chain. It was a very controversial move, and the developers themselves did not know whether the miners in particular would join them, or whether they would continue with the old chain. But thankfully, the majority of miners decided to go with a new blockchain, and that's how Ethereum, as we know it, was born. But some miners continued with Ethereum Classic, that's the old blockchain. And funds were initially returned to investors. And unfortunately, this very first experiment at the DAO was not successful, but and it was dissolved. But hopefully we'll learn from that as well. And some projects from that unfortunate start, very interesting projects, got born on the blockchain. One of them is Aragon. They have an amazing code, credo, or set of moral values that they put on their website. And it's so inspiring, particularly in these testing times that humanity is in, that I just want to maybe read it out to you. I find it exceptionally profound. We believe humankind should use technology as a liberating tool to unleash all the goodwill and creativity of our species, rather than as a tool to enslave and take advantage of one another. Thus, Aragon is a fight for freedom. Aragon empowers freedom by creating liberating tools that leverage decentralized technologies. The Aragon Association itself is a foundation based in Switzerland. It's the legal steward of all the funds, of all the projects that are part of the Aragon ecosystem. It was founded in 2016 by 2 internet entrepreneurs, and in their own admission, it was built out of this notion and of this unease because of the emergent societal crisis and failure of democracy. That's in their own words. Who are the users of Aragon? Well, all sorts of virtual worlds and subreddits and hacker collectives, DeFi protocols, even fashion houses, they all use Aragon to take their communities to the next level. They have a fairly impressive treasury of $190 million or so, and where they keep all the funds. Some of these funds are in fiat, like US dollars or euros, and most of it is in Bitcoin and Ethereum and some other cryptocurrencies. And you can always check how the funds are being spent. It's full transparency. And what the Aragon Association itself does is also to fund via grants new interesting decentralized projects in the ecosystem, in the Aragon ecosystem. So that's one example, Aragon. Another example is MakerDAO. It's another super interesting project, and it's actually a DAO-based platform that contains not one, but two types of tokens, Maker and DAI. It's a smart contracts platform based on Ethereum. Maker in itself, and we are interested mostly in Maker because we're talking about decentralized organizations, is the governance token of this project. And DAI is the stable coin. Maker and its token holders govern DAI and its stability. It is soft pegged to the US dollars. So if you're an owner of Maker, Maker token gives you a stakeholder position in the broader Maker ecosystem. You as a maker, with Maker, as an owner, you're able to take part in the maintenance of the entire Maker ecosystem. And this includes the maintenance of their stablecoin DAI. The market's value of this company or project rather is determined by and closely linked to DAI, the stable coin. It's a DeFi project, so it's used in other DeFi projects like in lending protocols, Aave and Compound, decentralized exchanges like Uniswap and Curve, and it's used in derivatives platforms. What are some of the other things, interesting things that Maker token holders can do apart from on the governance and voting? Well, they can do things like, for example, trigger an emergency shutdown. What that means, they can stop and settle the protocol to enforce the target price, because remember, it's pegged to the US dollar, in the case of an emergency. They can also modify DAI saving rate. They can choose a set of price oracles, and a price oracle is a piece of software that connects your project to some information outside the blockchain, so it's off blockchain. It transforms the financial landscape by bringing transparency, speed, and accessibility to the industry. That's their kind of vision and mission. And the third example that I would like to give you is Shapeshift. And Shapeshift is particularly interesting because it's an organization that's moving from being a corporate entity into a DAO. Shapeshift is headed, or rather led, by Eric Voorhees. He doesn't consider himself as a founder anymore. He's just a leader of the project. It's Shapeshift itself. It's a company that offers global training to a variety of digital assets. It can be either on the web or you can use other mobile platforms. It's headquartered in Switzerland, but most of their operations are in the US. And it was probably one of the first companies that never actually requested any personal identification for you to use the platform, but they now and earlier they were required to do that because of regulation. And all this move is to keep in line with the credo, which is complete decentralization. They are not decentralized yet. They're in the middle of it. And they were really wondering how their own employees will take it, because they said, well, it's completely new and untested. It's very new to humanity. Are you coming on board? And many employees said, yes, we're coming on board. We want to be part of something bigger. So they closed their accounts. The corporation itself was dissolved, and they're of the opinion that DAOs cannot integrate with the traditional finance very well. All they will do, they will only hold crypto and stable coins for stability. Banks, because of that, have become completely irrelevant. They don't need DAOs and Shapeshift. They don't need office spaces. They don't need leases. If they want to pay someone like a lawyer or another contractor, they can just really send them money. There's no need for non-disclosure agreements or anything of that sort. And Eric Voorhees, as I mentioned, he's a thought leader. He has a very interesting statement as well about DAOs and why they're so interesting. It's hyper-capitalistic, and thank goodness that's actually a system that's hyper-capitalistic, that is supposed to be what America was about, a free market capitalist country. The good thing about crypto is that unlike fiat and the banking establishment, it is purely voluntary, and the industry will remain peaceful, a peaceful place as long as self-custody is maintained. And before I wrap it up, I just want to mention a couple of issues which are around regulation, because these entities like DAOs, they don't have one piece of, or rather they're not located in one particular jurisdiction, right? So what are the issues there? We need to recognize that regulators are several years behind any technology, and to them, DAOs is like a new world, and they're really at a loss, apart from pockets of jurisdictional enlightenment here and there across the world. But generally speaking, they're not that enlightened. And just to draw a parallel of how retarded regulation can be, do you know, and that's something that I learned recently about fax machines. When fax machines were first introduced, they were banned in the US because they were a threat to the monopoly of the US Postal Service. But because everybody was using them anyway, and certainly outside the US, business owners started using them, eventually regulation had to say, okay, well, you can use them. We are okay with that. But before DAOs can establish themselves as a company, there are still some legal challenges ahead. There is no one national location for a DAO. It can be decentralized. It is worldwide. And this really raises questions about what form of society a DAO would represent, as well as, well, what kind of laws a DAO and its stakeholders will be complying with. So I just want to emphasize here a couple of key points and maybe a few takeaways. So what do you think? Are DAOs the institutions of the future, with code at the center and humans at the periphery? It's up to you to decide. All I can say, we're still very early. Today, it's all about crypto. Tomorrow, many organizations from outside crypto can become DAO, can go DAO. DAOs are incredibly easy to set up. You don't need to go through this articles of incorporation and acquiring legal expertise and approval and so on and so forth. But DAOs at the moment are not a reliable source of income, so it's a big pain point for creators at the moment. However, the survey that I mentioned previously of DAOs around the world has shown that participants are actually very happy to be part of DAOs because they're feeling of fulfillment, meaning, purpose that's not found in traditional organizations. I hope you agree with me. And ownership, it's ownership of the DAO that fuels this empowerment and fuels the sense of satisfaction. And they're also at the bleeding edge of tech and culture. So that's a drawing point for them as well. So what is it for you there? Well, maybe you can participate in a DAO, become an investor. If you already have a blockchain-based project, if you're an entrepreneur and you're thinking DAO to DAO, not to DAO, well, maybe you should become a DAO. Many blockchain projects claim to be DAOs, decentralized, but actually they're not. They're very centralized, and they're decentralized in the name only, or DAO, as we call them. So I hope you got a little bit of an insight into what the future of institutions might look like. I'm not saying it will, but it might. And thank you for joining. And I will see you on the Fringe next Friday, 2 p.m. Dubai time. Thank you.